The handcuffs were cold. I remember that detail with absolute clarity. The way the steel bit into my wrists, the way the boutique's glass doors reflected my own face back at me, and the way every single person on the sidewalk had their phone out. By the time I was walked to the patrol car, the video had already been uploaded. Federal judge caught shoplifting outside luxury boutique. 47 years on this earth. 22 years on the bench. And in 40 seconds, all of it was gone. But there's something they didn't show in that video. Something no one talked about until it was too late to hide. What actually happened that afternoon had nothing to do with a stolen scarf. It had everything to do with a man who had decided I was the one person standing between him and $120 million. But to understand that, I have to go back to the beginning. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I have been a federal judge for the Southern District of New York for 14 years. Before that, 8 years as an assistant U.S. attorney. And before that, I graduated second in my class at Columbia Law. I tell you this not to brag, but because you need to understand what was at stake. Not for me personally, but because the person who came after me understood it perfectly. He calculated every variable. He knew exactly how much a woman like me would lose if her reputation shattered in public. He knew it would take only one image, one headline, one 40-second video to do what no courtroom had ever managed. I lived alone in a brownstone in the West Village that I'd owned since my divorce. My mornings were always the same. Up at 5:30, coffee black, the Times on paper because I refused to read news on a screen before 9. I had a clerk named Marcus, 26. Brilliant, perpetually slightly terrified of me in the way that all good clerks are, who brought case files to my chambers by 8. My evenings were quiet. Dinner at my kitchen table, occasionally dinner with my friend Patricia, who taught constitutional law at NYU and had known me since we were both 24 and broke and sleeping on second-hand furniture. I did not drink much. I did not date. I exercised 4 mornings a week on a treadmill that faced a wall because I had decided that if I was going to do something unpleasant, I did not need to do it in front of a window. It was, by any measure, a controlled life, a deliberate life. One I had built with considerable care after the dissolution of a marriage that had cost me 2 years of bad sleep and 1 very expensive mediator. The Caldwell case arrived in my courtroom in early October. Victor Caldwell, 53, third-generation real estate money, the kind of face that appears on the covers of magazines about men who believe themselves to be self-made, was being tried on federal charges of wire fraud and bribery in connection with a waterfront development in Brooklyn. The alleged scheme involved 12 city officials, 3 construction firms, and a paper trail my prosecutors had spent 2 years building. Caldwell had 3 defense attorneys, a PR firm on retainer, and the social confidence of a man who had never once been told no by anyone he considered important. He walked into my courtroom on the first day of pretrial motions and looked around with the particular expression of a man assessing a property he intends to acquire. Then he looked directly at me. I'd seen that look before, from men who believed that everything, including the law, was negotiable. I made a note of it and moved on. What I did not make a note of, because it seemed entirely unremarkable at the time, was the man sitting 2 rows behind Caldwell's attorneys. Average height, neutral face, gray jacket. He wrote something in a small notebook and left during the lunch recess. I would not remember him until much later, when it was already too late for remembering to help. The first strange thing happened on a Wednesday in November. I was finishing a hearing on a motion to suppress evidence when Marcus slipped a folded note onto the edge of my bench. I waited until the attorneys finished, dismissed the session, and unfolded it in my chambers. It was from my colleague Judge Raymond Holt, who occupied the chambers 3 doors down and whom I had known for 11 years. Eleanor, we should talk. Not about anything specific, just talk. R. I texted him that evening and suggested lunch the following week. He replied immediately. Sooner, if possible. I looked at my phone in the dim kitchen light and felt a small, precise unease I could not name. Raymond was not an impulsive man. Sooner, if possible, was not his language. I met him 2 days later in a small cafe on Vesey Street that neither of us had any reason to be near. He was already there when I arrived, seated in the back, his hands wrapped around a cup he wasn't drinking from. He looked tired in a way that wasn't general but specific. The tiredness of someone carrying something heavy for longer than is healthy. "How's the Caldwell case going?" he asked before I sat down. I looked at him steadily. "Fine. Why?" He turned the cup in his hands without lifting it. "I've been getting calls," he said, lowering his voice even though the nearest table was empty, "from people in his orbit. Not directly. Nothing that constitutes contact. Just calls. People who know me, asking whether certain motions might go a particular way." He paused. I told them I had no idea and no interest in speculating. "Who called you?" I said. "I can't say specifically." He looked up at me, and his eyes were doing something I didn't quite recognize. Not guilt, but a close relation to it. The expression of a man who has decided how far he will go, and is not entirely comfortable with where that line falls. I probably shouldn't even be saying this much. "Raymond," I said quietly, "if someone has approached you regarding my case, you need to report it." "I know," he said. But he didn't report it. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I left that coffee believing Raymond was warning me out of loyalty, and I was grateful to him for it in a way that would later embarrass me considerably. He was doing something more complicated than loyalty, and the difference between those two things would cost me weeks I could not afford to lose. The defense filed 3 additional motions in the following 2 weeks. All standard, all reasonable, none alarming on their own. But the pattern was visible if you looked. Every motion was designed to push the trial date. Every filing created a procedural reason for delay. I denied 2 and allowed 1. When I denied the second, I watched Gregory Sauer, Caldwell's lead attorney, a man who communicated almost entirely through expensive suits and a practiced smile, absorb the ruling with a stillness that struck me as studied, not frustrated, recalculating. Marcus mentioned it on a Thursday morning, almost as an aside. It's almost like they're measuring how fast you respond rather than actually trying to win on any of the arguments. I told him it was a good observation. It was. That same week, I received a voicemail on my personal cell, a number I had given perhaps 40 people, from a woman who identified herself only as a friend of a friend and said that sometimes these things resolve better quietly, and that there were people who could make a case disappear for the right kind of conversation. She left no callback number. I forwarded the message to the U.S. Marshals Judicial Security Division with a written summary. The duty officer called back within the hour and told me they would look into it. I did not hear from them again for 11 days, by which point the Bleecker Street incident had already happened and the voicemail had become considerably more urgent. My Saturday walks through the West Village were one of the rituals I used to stay sane during heavy dockets. Cheese and bread from the shops on Bleecker, sometimes a stop at a small bookshop that survived on neighborhood loyalty. That particular Saturday in December was cold and bright, the air carrying the faint smell of exhaust and roasted nuts from a cart on the corner. I wore my dark coat, flat boots, a canvas bag. I was in no hurry. I passed a boutique called Severin, one of those narrow, expensive shops that operates with the confidence of a place that doesn't need your business, and paused a moment at the window. Deep green cashmere against cream linen. I admired it the way you admire things you have no intention of buying, then moved on toward the bookshop. I was 50 feet past the door when I heard it. Ma'am, stop, please." A security guard was coming toward me at a fast walk, one hand slightly raised. Young, mid-20s, square-faced, new to wearing a uniform. Behind him, at the boutique entrance, stood a dark-haired woman in her 30s with an expression of determined anxiety. "Ma'am," the guard said, reaching me, "I need to ask you to come back inside." I looked at him with complete blankness. "I beg your pardon?" "We have you on camera," he said. His voice had the quality of someone reciting a line they've been given. Taking a scarf from the display near the entrance, a precise razor-edged clarity settled over me, the kind I associated with the moment a case shows you its real shape. I looked at the guard. I looked at the woman in the doorway. I looked at my canvas bag, which contained a block of aged Gouda, a rosemary focaccia, and a biography of Ruth Bader Ginsburg I had paid for with a card 20 minutes earlier. "I didn't take anything from your store," I said. The voice I used when an attorney tried to introduce inadmissible evidence. Calm, final, carrying a particular quality of warning. "The camera," the guard started. "Then show me the footage," I said. Instead of doing the reasonable, legally defensible thing, taking me inside to review it, the assistant manager called the police. Before I had refused to cooperate with anything, before there had been any attempt to resolve the situation, before there was any legal justification for detention, she called and told the dispatcher that a woman was refusing to return stolen merchandise and was becoming confrontational. I was standing perfectly still on a public sidewalk. 2 officers arrived in 4 minutes. 4 minutes on a Saturday morning on Bleecker Street. I noted it the way I noted everything. One officer, when I gave my name and title, shifted fractionally, the recalibration of a professional absorbing unexpected information. "Judge Marsh," he said carefully, "can I ask you to wait one moment?" The second officer had already reached for his handcuffs. "Policy, ma'am. Standard procedure during an active theft complaint." The metal was cold. I remember the temperature more than anything else. Cold and heavier than expected, and real in a way that the preceding 5 minutes had not been. I stood on Bleecker Street in my dark coat with my canvas bag and my Ruth Bader Ginsburg biography, handcuffed on a public sidewalk while at least 7 people filmed me. I kept my face entirely still. I had spent 22 years keeping my face still in circumstances far more serious than this. But something in my chest was doing a thing I had no precise name for. A structural compression, like a beam under more load than it was built to carry. By 6 that evening, the video had 400,000 views. By midnight, 2 million. By Sunday morning, when my phone showed 112 missed calls and the chief judge of the Second Circuit had left a message asking me to call at my earliest convenience, the headline was everywhere. "Federal judge arrested for shoplifting at Manhattan boutique." Not alleged, not accused. Arrested. I sat at my kitchen table with a coffee that had gone cold and did what I always do when I cannot immediately see the shape of a problem. I went back to the beginning. Back to the guard, the assistant manager, those 4 minutes. Something was wrong with the sequence. Police in 4 minutes on a Saturday morning in a neighborhood where a noise complaint routinely takes 40. I pulled up the assistant manager's name from the officer's report. I had photographed it with my phone and found her LinkedIn in 90 seconds. 3 weeks on the job at Severin. And before Severin, for 2 years and 4 months, she had worked as an office manager for a company called Caldwell and Associates Development Group. The coffee cup left a ring on the table when I pushed back my chair. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. Instead, something settled into place in my chest. Cold, heavy, entirely clear. The way a verdict feels before the foreman is finished reading it aloud. I already knew. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. She'd been awake. She'd seen the news. "Eleanor," she said before I could speak. "The assistant manager who called the police worked for Caldwell's company," I said. "She left 3 weeks ago and started at that boutique 2 weeks before Saturday." 3 full seconds of silence. I heard her breathe. "You need David Chen," she said. "I know. Not a colleague. Not someone who will manage this quietly for the sake of the bench's reputation. David Chen. Call him. Tell him 9 a.m. tomorrow." I hung up and sat in the gray kitchen light for a long time. I was not fine. What I was, with the cold coffee and the 2 million views and the ghost weight of steel still present around my wrists, was a very particular kind of angry. Not the hot variety that makes you reckless. The other kind. The kind that calculates. The kind that does not move until it knows exactly where to strike. And it was becoming clearer to me with every passing minute that I would need to be very precise. Because whoever had done this had spent months building it. They had placed someone inside a boutique I occasionally visited. They had arranged a fast police response. They had timed the video. Every detail had been managed, which meant somewhere there was a trail of decisions and money and communication that no one had bothered to hide carefully enough. And trails, in my experience of 22 years, always lead somewhere. You only have to be willing to follow them all the way to the end. David Shen's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Park Avenue South, and it had the particular quality of spaces occupied by people who are very good at what they do and have no interest in impressing you about it. No awards on the walls, no framed magazine covers, a long table, good light, a whiteboard covered in dense handwriting he didn't bother to erase when I walked in. He was shorter than I expected. 50-something wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of compact stillness that reminded me of certain federal prosecutors I had watched over the years, the ones who consistently won. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't tell me he believed me. He poured coffee from a carafe on the sideboard, set a cup in front of me and said, "Walk me through Saturday from the moment you left your house." I walked him through it. All of it, in order, without editorializing. He listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. When I finished, he wrote 3 things on a yellow legal pad, tapped the pen twice against the page, and looked up. The assistant manager placed the call before any detention procedure was followed, he said with the flat certainty of someone identifying a structural fault. That's false imprisonment. The question is what the store's internal camera shows and whether anyone has already moved to alter that footage. That's what I'd like to know, I said. I need the name of the boutique's owner. Not the manager, the owner, he said. And I need the full Caldwell pretrial docket. The voicemail you forwarded to the marshals. Did you keep a copy? I kept the original recording, I said. And a screenshot of the originating number. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not satisfaction exactly, but the recognition that the material is workable. Good. That's very good. He closed the legal pad. Judge Marsh, I want to be clear about something. The people who did this are not amateurs. This was planned over weeks, possibly months. They will have contingencies. Whatever we find, we will find it because they didn't believe you would be the one looking. I met his eyes across the table. They were right that I wouldn't usually be looking, I said. They miscalculated what would happen when they gave me a reason to start. He looked at me for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. Let's get to work. I spent 4 hours in David's office that Monday. When I left, it was raining. A cold, steady rain that turned the sidewalk dark and made the streetlights blur. I stood under the awning a moment before stepping out, collar turned up, and thought about the last time I'd stood outside in the cold feeling like everything was about to change. It had been the night before my first day on the bench, 14 years ago. Standing outside the courthouse at 11:30 at night, looking up at the building, thinking, this is either the best decision you ever made or the beginning of a very long mistake. I had been right about the first part. I was, as of this week, testing the limits of the second. David called the following morning at 7:45. The boutique owner's name is Margot Severin, he said without preamble. 9 years running that store, no connection to Caldwell. But here's what's interesting. She has her own security system, separate from the system the assistant manager had access to. A private camera she installed after a break-in 3 years ago feeds directly to a cloud server she controls personally. The assistant manager didn't know it existed. I set down my coffee cup. What does it show? I don't have access yet. But Margot Severin is willing to cooperate. She's furious, Eleanor. She found out yesterday that her assistant manager had worked for Caldwell's company, and she feels her store was used as a weapon. She called me this morning before I called you. A pause. Do you remember a man in a gray jacket at your first Caldwell pretrial hearing? Average height, took notes, left at lunch. The kitchen was very quiet. Yes, I said. I've been trying to place him since Sunday. His name is Neil Baxter. Private investigator. He's been on Caldwell's payroll for 7 months. And Eleanor, he was on Bleecker Street on Saturday. 7 months. He had been watching me for 7 months. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside, tires hissing on wet pavement. I stood up from my chair without realizing I had done it. He put the scarf in my bag, I said. Not a question. Based on what Margot's camera may show, I want to be careful until we see it. Yes. David stopped. I need you to trust me until tomorrow afternoon. I trust you, I said. What I don't have is patience. He almost laughed. 24 hours. Stay off social media. Don't speak to anyone from your court. And Eleanor, don't speak to Raymond Holt. My hand tightened on the phone. What do you know about Raymond? A pause that lasted precisely 1 second too long. Tomorrow, he said quietly. I'll tell you everything tomorrow. I stood in the kitchen after the call and looked at the legal pad on the table. Raymond Holt, 11 years, 3 doors down, the coffee on Vesey Street where he had told me I know and done nothing. I thought about the calibrated precision of what he had shared, enough to seem like loyalty, not enough to be useful, enough to make me feel that someone was on my side. And I understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that it had not been a warning, it had been observation, to see what I knew, to report what I said. I sat back down at the kitchen table, and I did not feel betrayed in the way I would have expected. The grief was there, but underneath it was something harder and more durable, a cold, focused rage, clean as a surgical instrument. The footage from Margot Severin's private camera was 47 seconds long. I watched it 5 times in the boutique's back room while David stood beside me and Margot, a compact woman in her late 50s with close-cropped silver hair and the contained energy of someone who has been angry for 36 hours. Stood by the door with her arms folded. The footage was sharp. The angle was slightly elevated, aimed at the entrance display and the strip of sidewalk visible through the glass. It showed me pausing at the window for approximately 6 seconds. It showed me walking away. And it showed, with absolute clarity, Neil Baxter stepping into frame 20 seconds after I passed, removing a folded silk scarf from inside his jacket and placing it in the outer pocket of my canvas bag in one smooth, practiced motion as he walked past me from behind. I had not felt a thing. He was very good at this. He had done it before. There it is, David said very quietly. Margot said nothing. I said nothing. I watched it a 6th time. The screen light in the dim room was cold and blue. The footage was 47 seconds long, and it ended everything Victor Caldwell had built. But I was not done, because the footage only solved my problem. What I wanted, what I had decided somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning on Sunday while filling my legal pad, was to solve his. David presented the footage to the U.S. Marshal's office the following morning, along with the voicemail recording and a written summary of Baxter's presence at the pretrial hearing. The warrant application was prepared. Baxter had already been identified leaving the city. The assistant manager, her name was Claire Novak, and she had left Caldwell's employ 3 weeks before the incident with a severance package approximately 6 times what her position warranted, was contacted and retained her own attorney within the hour, which told you precisely what she understood about what she had agreed to do. The arrest warrant for Victor Caldwell came on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my kitchen when David called. "It's done," he said. "He was taken into custody an hour ago." A brief pause. And Eleanor. Baxter cooperated faster than I expected. He gave them Holt. There it was. I had been waiting for it, and it still landed with weight. Raymond Holt had not simply observed and reported back. According to what Baxter told investigators, Raymond had been the one to identify my Saturday routine, the walks, the specific shops, the boutique. He had suggested the Severin approach because he knew the neighborhood, knew my habits. In exchange, Caldwell's attorneys had quietly facilitated the transfer of 2 cases from Raymond's docket that he had been struggling with for reasons the Judicial Council would later investigate in considerable depth. Raymond had not been warned by Caldwell's people. He had been recruited by them, months before the Vesey Street coffee. The warning had been performance. I sat with that for a long time. 11 years. I tried to find the specific moment where the Raymond I thought I knew had stopped being real, and the other one had taken his place. I couldn't find it, which probably meant there was no single moment, which was, somehow, worse than one clean betrayal. The Judicial Council hearing was public. Raymond Holt resigned from the bench 2 days before it convened. The Caldwell trial, reassigned and rescheduled, proceeded 4 months later. Victor Caldwell was convicted on all 11 counts. He was sentenced to 9 years. His waterfront development project was canceled, his PR firm terminated the contract, and the apartment where he had been arrested was photographed by a tabloid photographer who had been tipped off about the exact arrest time. David told me this with a satisfaction he did not bother to conceal. "Someone felt it was important," he said. I have no idea who. I returned to the bench on a Tuesday in March. Cold but bright. The particular quality of late winter light in New York that makes everything look more itself than usual. I took the subway because I always took the subway. I walked the 2 blocks from the station to the courthouse past the same vendors, the same coffee cart, the same security desk where the same guard, Thomas, 23 years in the building, said, "Morning, Judge Marsh." Without looking up, then looked up and said it again, differently, as though it meant something, which it did. Marcus was in my chambers when I arrived, case files already stacked in order, coffee going on the sideboard. He looked at me for 1 full second without speaking, and then said, "The 9:30 is ready when you are," in the voice of someone who has rehearsed neutral and almost achieved it. I was moved by it more than I could comfortably express, so I picked up the first file and got to work. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in late spring, I walked down Bleecker Street again. Same coat, same flat boots, the canvas bag. I stopped at the cheese shop, bought a block of aged Gouda. I stopped at the bakery for rosemary focaccia. I stopped at the small bookshop and bought a book I'd been meaning to read for 2 years, paid with a card, folded the receipt, and put it in my bag. I walked past Severin. The window had a different display now, pale gold silk against dark wood. Margot was visible inside, speaking with a customer. She saw me through the glass and gave one small, precise nod. I nodded back. I walked home. I put the groceries on the counter and started the coffee machine and stood in my kitchen in the bright morning light. And I thought about what Victor Caldwell had been certain of when he designed the entire operation. He had been certain that I was a woman whose identity lived entirely in her reputation, and that without the reputation, there was nothing left to fight with. He had been wrong about that in a way I found almost flattering. The reputation was valuable. It was not the foundation. The foundation had been built from something older and harder and considerably more difficult to undermine than a 40-second video on a sidewalk. The coffee finished. I poured a cup and drank it while it was still hot, standing at my kitchen window watching the city do its indifferent, magnificent thing outside. It did not taste bitter. It had not tasted bitter for quite some time.